Hello, and everyone. Welcome to our AI Optimism Chapters 5 and 6, Design and Create. I am so excited to continue our conversation here as we, as educators, are navigating our own personal journeys through AI. And I am so excited to be able to be joined here by my two personal friends as well. So a little bit about me. I'm a digital learning coach in my district located in Zionsville, Indiana. I have been in education for, this is my 16th year, and I'm so excited to be able to share some space. So Brinny, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Stevie, for having me on the show again. I'm Brenny Coomer. I'm the Assistant Director of EdTech in Columbus, Indiana for BCSC. I'm always excited to talk about AI and learn and grow, and I think Stevie kicked it off great by saying we're on our ever-evolving journey of AI, and I think this chapter really lends itself well to those discussions. We're also joined here by our amazing friend, Tim.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tim Arnold. I'm a district e-learning specialist at Richmond Community Schools. I spent 26 years in a 7 through 12 social studies classroom, and I serve with these other two as innovation coaches with Keep Indiana Learning, and I'm also a member of the HEC board. And I think, Stevie, we're going to throw it back to you to get us rolling today.
And Tim, you also left off that you are now coined TikTok Tim. So okay. Tim has got some really great content on the Keep Indiana Learning YouTube channel. So definitely make sure to check him out in his amazing videos that he has. So well, thank you everybody for joining. I was so excited I read the book when I first got it, and then I always try to go back and look at everything that I highlighted and I underlined just to catch myself back up to get prepared for this. And I was so excited about these chapters because when I first started reading this book, I felt like this topic came up quite a bit. With just different AI learning models. And so I'm just going to dive in because I felt like it was such a hot topic that I found out whenever I started realizing that teachers and educators were using student-facing forward AI chatbots to not just be an AI chatbot to talk with somebody, but it was to discuss with that AI chatbot that was programmed or that was trained to be a person that is no longer living. So for example, if you are learning about Abraham Lincoln in your classroom, which is a 4th grade standard, to be taking a look at some of that historical references and figures, you could set up an AI chatbot to be able to talk back and forth with them. Now, in this chapter, that is something that also Becky refers back to, where she talks about the SAMR model and really using that redefinition phase of that model. When she introduced the topic, she also introduced the ideology of, is this ethically okay? So when I first read this book, I punted this question to X, Twitter, and I think both of you had actually responded to it. So it was interesting. So now here we are, full circle. What are your thoughts on what this looks like with students?
I don't remember what I said back on Twitter then. Maybe I should have pulled up some receipts, but
I know I should come prepared with receipts.
I know. I feel like this is probably the most non-answer way of answering this, but I have some feelings about it. And mainly I think my answer is it just depends on context. I know Tim's a social studies teacher too, and I know you love humanities stuff as well, Stevie. And I think if I really wanted my students to dig into primary sources and to think about learning from the words of people from the past, I don't know if I would necessarily create a chatbot to impersonate that person. It makes me feel icky. And I don't know of a better way to explain it other than that. And then I feel like it muddies the waters in what an AI bot is, that it's not a person. And I think the more clear we can be about that to students, the better. Now, I don't love the idea of having the bot impersonate someone who is real. That's not what I love. And I think if you dig into some of the different gaps and biases that AI tools have too, then are we perpetuating those by giving our students a tool and access to a tool that we know has gaps, that doesn't always reflect the diversity in our classrooms? And is this, continuing that. So I have other thoughts too about how these tools can be helpful, but that's always something that gives me pause. So Tim, what are your thoughts?
Well, just here in the last day and a half, I have built a researcher interview room filled with chatbots for fifth graders. Now, I used Magic School to do that. And so while I share some of your concerns kind of in the wild, wild west or open market of AI, if we get ourselves into a specific tool and we make sure that the human in the loop is placing those guardrails, I feel a little less apprehensive about it, I guess. So we use the Wit and Wisdom curriculum, and they are starting a Civil War unit, and the Boys' War is one of the texts that they're using. And so the teacher wanted to have a way for them to really have access to those human voices. Now, I felt the need to make sure that I had voices from the North, voices from the South, male and female voices, the voices of Black and white soldiers that you may or may not always get from straight AI. But that's, again, why the human in the loop is so important to try to give them that perspective.
I love that perspective. I like just listening to both of you, and it all has to deal with context, right? To put my input on this one, this was something that I really struggled with, and I felt like it was anthropomorphizing the AI into pretending that it was someone, a human, when it wasn't. And that was something that I don't know, I struggled with. Today is our first teacher in service day back from break. And I actually was talking, we have Wit and Wisdom as well. And I was talking with the teacher and she's like, hey, I heard somebody do this. And when I sat down with her and I talked with her, I was like, I have a cause for pause with this, with that specific topic, because she was like, I want them to, it was a second grade teacher talking about Ruby Bridges, because that's one of the units, and talking with Ruby Bridges. And I was like, and I kind of explained it to her a little bit where I was like, I just have a pause with it. I was like, but what if we set up a scenario where other part of the unit was like a march to Washington? And so what would it be like to be there and live? And then maybe you could talk back and forth with the chatbot about the time period. And so for both of us after that conversation, we both kind of were like, okay, I feel a little better about that. I don't know. That has been a topic. And I know Becky brought it up in her book where she talked about how somebody had used her likeness and created an AI generated video of translation. And she's like, I didn't give my consent. And so she was sharing her considerations with that, where she didn't approve that. And I've been on somebody's podcast before, and it was video. And when it came out, I was redone. I looked like I had a makeover. And I was like, nobody asked my consent on that. And I thought that was interesting. So I don't know. I think it kind of, for me, it was that borderline of like, I think with AI, we really need to seek consent first. And if somebody's passed, you can't get that consent. So I don't know. That was my cause for pause. And I liked that she, in her book, described how it was good. And then she also described her considerations to it as well. And that's what I always appreciate about Keen's perspective on things, is she's going to give you like, here's what I think. And then here's how it's also an optimistic point of view, if you will. So love that. So I'm going to head it off to Brenny. So Brenny, what kind of questions do you have for us based on these chapters?
I feel like I say this every time we talk about this book, but I was highlighting a lot of it, and it sparked a lot of internal reflection, I think, and some of the ethical pieces. And I really agree with a lot of what you have said, both of you, and in your points. And I really do love that Becky provides both sides of any type of hot topic issue that she brings up. And in some of the pieces that she talked about in this chapter, I kept thinking of just a lot of the new teachers that we have in our district. And even those who maybe aren't just new to the world of teaching, but have maybe come back after a break or a different career, or are starting their career in teaching, even though they have experience somewhere else. And I'm just thinking of just some of the challenges that new teachers face, and thinking back on my own experience. And these tools weren't abound then as they are now. So in the chapters too, she also talks about how to leverage AI to save yourself time, and unpacking standards, and how those are really important tasks, but they're really time consuming. So I think the question I have for both of you is, if you put yourself back into your first year teacher, new teacher mindset, or the mindset of some of the new teachers that you support, what is a piece of advice that you would give them and how they could use AI? Or thinking of your own experience, what would be a really transformational piece that could really open that door and get you thinking further along this framework and the deeper implementation of it later on?
First of all, such a great question. I love this. Something that I always try to support with teachers, and something that I think is really lovely about having a coaching role, is that human relationship aspect. And so what I lean into all of my teachers with is technology and access and checking emails and all. Like, you're never going to catch up. And I always try to implore my teachers to, like, don't have your email on your phone. Like, if you have it on, turn off notifications. Your computer doesn't need to ding every single time you get an email. Like, let's talk about some of those notifications to quiet it down. And then I would lean in with those teachers on productivity so we could get them out the door at a decent hour. So it's just kind of like I would with anything. When you're leading forward with technology, I always start with the that substitution method. So I would kind of lean into those practices of saying, here's how to save time. And then I would come in on their second, third year and just be like, hey, remember when we used this tool too? Now we can use this tool to work on some of those more transformative components. So I would use it as a way for productivity, which is kind of how I've started it with my teachers. Tim, what have you been doing?
So if I was to transport myself back many, many years ago, I'll be honest, I think, and my wife and I were going through this at the same time, so it was really instructional for both of us. It took us 3 full years before I think we've said, okay, we feel really good and confident with the content that we're teaching. And now you get beyond that, and you're not trying to spend your time filling the class period with whatever you want people to do. And you really have a chance to look at things at a different level. And so from that perspective of a first year teacher, I think we can really shrink that time. And the one that Brenny mentioned that I think is a really good tool is that standards unpacker tool that you can find, where you can find, you can blow that standard apart, find the bits and pieces that you want, find the connections to whether it's other standards that you're working with or other subject areas. All of those things you can find and really save yourself some time in building what it is you're trying to build, because you're not spending all your time learning the content, although that's very important and you should do that. We can find those connections a little bit faster. So whether you want to look at lesson plans or unit plans or project-based learning plans, or even something small like lesson hooks, there are AI tools out there to help you, to give you a little bit of a head start and save you a little bit of time.
Tim, I gotta say, I love that. And I really, the way that you described it, and it just made me think, as I was like, you were creating an AI agent, you were creating this thought partner, you programmed it, you figured it out to say, here's what I'm looking for. And I love that use.
I love that. And I love how both of you really focus on the human side of things too, that it takes time, and that if we can't reduce some of the cognitive load and the noise of just all the productivity things we have to do, then like none of the other pieces are going to be able to do well. So I appreciate, Stevie, that you referenced tackling that first, because that is so overwhelming, and setting those boundaries and kind of getting those pieces down pat first helps us become better designers. And I think, to even answer my own question, my mind definitely went to the standards piece that Tim talked about, but I just think too that I really had these creativity ideas and projects that I wanted to do with my students, but then I would freeze and get so overwhelmed in just planning those because I didn't feel like I had enough time. So while I wanted to do some of those pieces, organizing it was something that was challenging for me or overwhelming. And I think now that maybe setting up an agent to do things like that, or to help me take my big pie in the sky idea and actually make it something I could implement with my students, would have been really helpful for me as a first or second year teacher, and would have let me be more creative and willing to take risks.
Yeah, I think that listening to you talk and thinking about the things in these chapters, it really made me think about how I use AI every day. And I think I boiled it down to about 3 things. One of it is, let's say I have an idea that I've started, or I'm prepared to start, or it's already started, but I'm looking for a twist, maybe a connection to a specific thing, or a place, or even a song. I've got this goofy habit of preparing PD and then taking a popular song and changing the lyrics to be about the PD. And I love doing that because I can bring my guitar, but stuff like that. So that's one way. The second way is I've started an idea. I have it on paper, but I want a list of options that are going to help me clarify it or clarify the task or the goal or the outcome so that I know that I'm going to end up where I want to end up. And then the third way is I have an idea, but I need a framework or some organization for the task. And usually early in the process, that I can either accept or reject or modify and use. But in all three examples, I've done some pre-work. And I think that's the same thing I would ask of my students. I want them to use AI, but I think there needs to be some pre-work or what I call a ticket to the AI. What do you guys think about that idea?
I love that idea, Tim. I think that it's, again, centering the human in the center of what you're wanting your AI agent or that AI chatbot to complete. And that's something that I love that you gave light to, where you were like, you mentioned at the beginning when you started talking, you're like, I started to reflect on how I use AI, and I have too. And that's what I've really enjoyed about this book is before I used to be like, oh, productivity, productivity, productivity. That was something that I really thought was a great marker. And then I started realizing, wow, how can I use this agent to, yes, save time, but make what I'm creating better? And those prompts have just made, I don't know, that's just like, I'm like, I have an agent, I have something that I'm able to bounce ideas off of so much easier. So, Brenny, how about you?
Well, I think I was along the same lines of thinking, oh, it's so good for productivity. Like I can knock off so many more items off my to-do list thanks to AI, and I don't just sit there and brain freeze forever. But then as I read the notes to prep for this discussion, I was like, wait a second, I'm going to start like logging. And I have my little scrap piece of paper over here where I've been logging it, how I've been using it over like the last few weeks or so. And I'm realizing I'm not honestly using it for productivity as frequently as I thought I was. Certainly it's like helping me draft emails, refine emails. I tend to be long-winded, which maybe isn't surprising to any of you when I write things out. And that's not always everyone's cup of tea when they're getting an email about something they want an answer, not 3 paragraphs of Brenny answering it with some fluff in between. But I really realized that I'm using it to condense information, to think about things in a different way, or when I'm planning sessions, because I use AI to help me plan formatting and presentations and workshops I'm doing. I'm honestly going to it for more of like that augmentation and modification type of piece more than just substitution. Like I'm going to it to make my sessions better because I already have an idea in mind, which really is what Tim hit on. I'm always going through with a goal or a specific task. I'm not going there to get that idea and just taking it as is. It's always like a way to refine or improve. It's never really the final product. So thank you both for sparking that reflection and getting me thinking about how I'm using it more often.
And Tim, how about you? Do you have any last minute thoughts or questions for the group?
Well, the question I have really comes from, I think, chapter 6, where Becky Keene goes through and gives, by the way, tons of prompts that shows how to try out everything. So make sure you take a look at that if you have this book in your hands. And then she kind of explains, well, with this prompt, here's what I got, here's what I liked, here's what maybe I would change. But my question for the group is, what would be the result for our students if we don't incorporate AI into our planning or our lessons or their assignments? And is that acceptable? Is that equitable? Where do you come down on that idea?
Gosh, Tim, that's $1 million question you have there. And I feel like this has been a question, and I'm going to nerd out here and be like, that's been heavy on my heart about, because I feel like right now it's in this juxtaposition with not only like technology and AI, but then also us as a state, we all have to adopt a certain curriculum and literacy, right? And so as much as I'm like, okay, we have AI coming out here, but then I feel like there's a push for literacy to get off of computers. And now it's a lot of regurgitation, when it comes to what the students are expected to do. And to me, it's been this component where I'm like, we have to get kids prepared for a world that AI is going to be able to do a really large percentage of what this curriculum is asking them to do. So where does that, and I know this is a hot topic here, so we are just like hitting all these buttons. And this is coming from a humanities teacher too. So I want you to know that two things can be true at the same time. But that's something that I've really been struggling with. And so ways that I've been able to control what I can control in my realm is working with my personal kids on what it looks like. What is AI? What does this look like? How can we, I was using it as a way to generate a passage for my son Crew, who was like struggling with some words and context. And so I created a passage for him and I showed him. I was like, come here, like, let's do this together and talk him through. Now, that's inequitable when I'm talking about a public school setting because he's my son. I'm teaching him those skills. I think it's important that we lean into it. And I think a lot of people might have this misconception of thinking like, oh, well, just because you say you want to use AI, you just want to talk about the glitz and glamour of it. And I'm like, no, we need to teach kids how to use it because I am concerned. And I feel like that's what I really liked about the book is that Becky's and I've worked with her close enough to know like she's the realist about it. So yes, she's AI optimistic because I feel like that's what we need instead of looking at it as this doom and gloom situation. But I also look at it to be a marker of how can we start to use it in some 2.0 ways because we have an opportunity right now in education to really change what we've been doing for so long. So that's my hot take. Brenny, what's your ideas on this?
I don't know. This is a really good question. And I like looked at it earlier and was like, how am I going to answer this? And I still don't know if I have a really like solid answer. Maybe that's just been my answer to everything today. But I think I almost like answer your question with a question, which is very, meta of me. But I almost think the question is, what are we designing? And is it serving all of our students? And I think right now, if we continue to go on the path we're on, or if we avoid integrating AI into the conversation, then we're not helping all of our students, right? Like we know AI tools can support access, they can remove barriers, they can help us create accessible materials that otherwise would take us hours to do or would be impossible for our students. So what is the true goal? And does AI help us get there, or does it make it better for the student? Is really how I try to frame conversations around it in my own thinking. And I don't think we should just use it for its own sake. And I think if it's helping us translate things to make things more engaging for our students, and I say engaging and not just, every student doing the same thing, if it allows us to create more experiences that are that higher order thinking that Becky really talked about in the early chapters, then I think that's the goal. And I think that's the best way to use it. And the design should drive the implementation rather than the tool, determining what all of the tasks look like. So I think that's kind of my answer. And I think if we don't use it, then we are perpetuating inequities personally.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. I think it comes down to change, which is never easy when you're dealing with any sort of system or human being. But for me as a teacher, I know I've got to change my assignment. I've got to change what I'm asking students for. I feel like I need to require AI as a part of the process that I'm asking them to complete. And ultimately, I want them to evaluate the AI outputs. That's kind of what I've been talking to teachers about recently. Now, is there an engagement uptick when you first start using AI? Yes, but I think we all know that's a Trojan horse, right? That only is going to last for so long. So what is it that we're designing, which you said, Brenny, that is going to have lasting long-term impact through students using AI as a part of the process of their learning? I think that's kind of where I've landed.
I just love that this conversation, what I noticed just as a theme of just all of us are, like I said at the beginning, like we're navigating this live with everybody too, because it's a big concept and AI came onto our scene just as quickly as it has everybody else's. And if you're sitting here listening and you're like, well, I use AI for productivity, what's wrong with that? Continue. That was definitely something that I presented on frequently and I still talk about because I think it's a great space to start. But it's just like anything where you can start to evolve. And if you're ready for that evolvement, if you're like, okay, I've been doing this AI thing, I've got that down, pick up this book and it will start to really give you some really great ways on utilizing AI and just, I think, hard examples like do this, try this, try this. Like here's multiple examples. She goes back and forth with different prompts. Tim, you brought up, having students analyze the different outputs. She'll even use like 4 or 5 different large language models and then talk to you about the differences. Like, here's what Copilot popped out. Here's what Gemini popped out. And so talking about even different models and how their results, yield different responses, I think is such a great concept. So I thank all of you for joining in and just listening to us as we stumble through this thing called AI and trying to figure it out. I just happen to be able to be surrounded by friends and have this space to also be able to think out loud. So I thank all of you again for listening, and feel free to comment below and start a discussion. I can't wait to hear what all of you think about what this looks like too as well, as we're all fumbling through it. So I'm so excited to join us. We have about 4 more chapters to go. And so these are some of the more very in-depth chapters, and I can't wait to get into the weeds with this group. So any last closing words from you two? Okay, all right.
We'll be here. Yeah.
Well, now that I know that TikTok Tim now knows how to play guitar, like
You never know.
all right. Thank you all for joining. You have a great rest of your day.